there are concerns that South Africa is living through a series of traumatic events that are having an accumulative toll on society's well-being. In recent months, there was devastation, of course, caused by the COVID-19 pandemic. Let's just cast our minds back to the July Civil Unrest of last year and, of course, this week's deadly Diepsloot protests. These are just to name only very few. There are many, many other issues that we can count insofar as trauma in our nation is concerned. So experts say many in the country don't do very well in terms of dealing with the psychological effects of these events, while others are experiencing delayed trauma reactions. So to help us understand this, we're now joined by clinical psychologist Benedict Mhlongo, who joins us via our video link this morning. Benedict, it's great to have you with us on the program. On such a timeous discussion, the trauma that we have suffered as a nation, and of course historically we can go so incredibly far back insofar as our fight against apartheid is concerned, the years preceding that, the years following apartheid, our gender-based violence numbers, the effects of COVID-19, so many people losing numerous loved ones over the period of the past 2 years. There's a lot going on in our country, Benedict, that makes us think that there's a lot of trauma in our psyche.
That's very true, Michelle, because I mean, as you mentioned, actually, it's a resurgence of particular trauma specifically around that a very graphic type of traumatic experience. But we don't have, as a country or as a particular culture, where we then actually offload. So remember, anything that is traumatic, that is not addressed or actually expressed, becomes internalized in a sense of anger. So all that we are actually experiencing is a level of pain, because anger is a secondary emotion. But the primary emotion we're feeling is pain. So the inability to express ourselves is actually expressed through angered type of responses as well, hence the level of violence.
You know, South Africa is known, we're known for our sense of humor, aren't we? We're known for our ability to laugh in the face of unthinkable things happening on a daily basis. It is becoming incredibly difficult, some would say, to find the silver lining, though.
Yes, you're right, Michelle. I mean, humor on its own is it's what we call a defense mechanism. If I actually apply a level of humor, it means I'm not actually addressing this elephant in the room. And then what also then actually happens, we then actually get to have a habit of dissociation ourselves. If it's not happening to me, therefore it's okay. I'm not actually very much invested or not very much actually affected. So humor plays an important role in this element to actually disassociate ourselves from this traumatic series of events.
Yeah. We can think of many, many newspaper headlines, can't we, of gruesome murders, of serious gender-based violence cases, of incidents like the ones we've seen unfolding in Diepsloot this week, of COVID-19. There's the trauma in those kinds of horrific events that take place. And then in our context in South Africa, and this is an article by our colleague in the industry, Conita Hunter, in fact going back as far back as 2020, but she talks about the trauma of indignity as well in South Africa. So it's not a particular event perhaps that's linked to a murder or the loss of a loved one in a very gruesome way or due to COVID-19, etc., but the trauma of the levels of poverty in our country as well.
I mean that's actually quite well put out. Because, I mean, sometimes we tend to analyze trauma as something that is actually as a result of certain something. Trauma needs to be, theatrical. But no, Michelle, trauma is also very much rooted in our elements of actually poverty, rooted in our lifestyles, rooted in also in our inequalities as well, that we live in the day-to-day type of actually lifestyle society. So there's trauma in that particular indignified type of lifestyle that people are actually exposed to as well. So anything that resembles anything that will show them to have a sense of liberty and actually grasping and killing this poverty will actually be very violent.
Benedict, can you trace the trauma of our own combined history in the country? Can you trace that back to the kinds of responses that we see? And this is on social media, so you never know what is a legitimate response from an actual human being that is not from some kind of Twitter bot farm. But can you trace our collective trauma to the response to the murder of Elvis Nyati, who we now know was a Zimbabwean national, killed in Diepsloot this week by an angry mob of people apparently targeting undocumented foreign nationals. And the response, at least by some accounts on social media, has been Yes, but what about the South Africans who are killed on a daily basis? Can you trace our traumatic trauma, our traumatic past as a country, to that kind of response where we can't even see the humanity in a person?
I think it's very important to maybe trace it back either to the apartheid, in as much as I don't like going back there all the time, but it's definitely there. Because remember, how we respond is not a response of where we then write memorandums, where we protest. Even our protests have actually become quite gruesome as well. So it's actually the inability of us being heard, the inability of them actually feeling not being seen or acknowledged or not actually being, identified. So that identity then actually leads to a person then wanting to be noticed or seen. How best can I actually do that? Through actually forms of actually very violent behaviors. In as much as, there's this gruesome and this very sad, occurrence or event that actually happened where, we lost a life was actually lost. But also it then comes back to say, but we are South Africans. So this xenophobic attacks also come from the fact that South Africans are feeling that they're not being heard or seen as well.
Yeah. So long-term, Benedict, what will be the impact on our country and our psyche collectively if this continues?
Definitely, long-term, I think people are actually going to still be capitalizing in the sense of their own urgency through such acts as well, because they feel like, again, they're not being heard. So then what then actually leads to that the younger generation is also going to take up that, because, observational learning, monkey see, monkey do. They'll end up actually doing what was actually done before them. That is actually creating or a resurgence of a particular culture that is very violent in nature, to say that if we are not heard or if identity is not seen out there, we're going to act in violent manners. So there's definitely going to be a culture of violence if it's not actually curbed specifically right now in this generation as well.
And what should be the role of government, of our leaders in government, in the context that you and I have been sketching this morning of this collective trauma that we're suffering from as a country?
I think we need pathways to the government that we can actually utilize that is actually going to allow us to be heard quite quicker, to be heard in a manner that is actually seen to be very collective, because we don't want individuals coming in also reporting. So it's very important to actually have our key leaders in communities like your local councillors and stuff like that, as well as, local proper key stakeholders to actually also intervene, to listen to the people and then bring that forth. Because the hierarchy is also very important in the sense that it's also going to be very much collective. So I think we need gateways or pathways to actually being heard as well that are very effective.
Yeah, certainly. Benedict Mhlongo, thanks very much for coming on and being a part of this incredibly important discussion.